Malacca, the $10 trillion throttle revealed. The $10 trillion throttle. 10 trillion on the line, engines idle, pilots stare at a ribbon just 1.5 miles wide over floor barely 23 meters deep. A fully loaded tanker drifts 5 degrees too far here. Within minutes, queue lights flash red across 3 oceans. Charters halt, bunkers are withheld, insurers tighten mid-voyage. But hold on, because what I'm about to tell you next will completely change how you think about this. No shots, no blockade, just a moving sandbank nobody saw on last week's chart and a spoofed instruction at 0317. Here's where things get interesting. The Strait of Malacca can fail in silence, and the people betting on that quiet failure aren't carrying guns. They're carrying spreadsheets, insurance clauses, and a draft line measured in centimeters. The question is whether this lane can choke. The real question is, who already knows how to nudge it, and why are they letting it happen? The lie, globalization is safe, while Malacca stays open. Start with the stakes, not the comfort. More than 80,000 ship transits a year. Container ships that stitch together phones, cars, and medicine. Tankers feeding refineries from Nagoya to Busan. LNG carriers locked to minute-wide windows. Roughly a third of global container trade touches this corridor. For East Asia, it isn't a strait, it's a throat. The story we told ourselves was simple. As long as navies patrol and pirates keep to skiffs, the flow is safe. Steel on the horizon equals certainty at the pump and on factory floors. That was the lie. Because Malacca's danger isn't mostly kinetic anymore. It's physical, digital, and financial, small forces that add up. And the numbers aren't rumors. Phillips Channel pinches to about 1.5 miles, with depths around 23 meters. LCCs and deep draft bulkers ride at 20 to 22 meters when heavy. Under keel clearance, a meter or two. Here's where things get interesting. Add siltation, sand waves pushed by monsoon pulses and Sumatra's river loads. Charts update, the bottom moves faster. One phantom island that wasn't there yesterday nudges a pilot's centerline and staggers everyone behind. One grounding at these depths isn't an incident, it's a calendar rewrite. Q math makes it worse. Pause traffic for 48 hours and you don't just move those ships 2 days forward. You stack arrivals into the same windows in Singapore, Port Klang and Tanjung Pelepers, then again in Shanghai, Yokohama and Long Beach. Tug allocations scramble, berth gangs go out of sequence, boxes miss rail, insurance clocks start. But hold on, because it gets tighter. A minor hold turns into a week of misaligned schedules across 3 oceans. Meanwhile, above the waterline, gray zone tools multiply. AIS, the global identification system that makes ship traffic visible, can be spoofed. Vessels appear steady on a screen while currents nudge them off course. Fake pilot instructions ping in under familiar call sign. In the 200s and 2010s, this felt fringe. In the 2020s, maritime cyber incidents surged. Some estimates put year-over-year spikes into the hundreds of % for targeted clusters, enough to change behavior. Bridge teams juggle VTS guidance, company messages, and chart corrections at 3 in the morning. Even when nothing malicious is intended, confusion at this density creates incidents. You don't need a skiff to seize a ship. You can seize its judgment for a minute and let physics do the rest. Insurers read the same tea leaves. War risk add-ons and cyber exclusions creep into policies. A messy week, 2 armed robberies, a cyber advisory, a near grounding can trigger Lloyd's market nerves. Premiums jump mid-vig. Captains get told to slow steam to save fuel against uncertain bunkers in Singapore, which tightens arrival windows further. A self-fulfilling choke. Now look at the cargo mix. It isn't just crude and containers. It's time-sensitive LNG where boil-off and slot bookings punish uncertainty. It's lithography tools and specialty gases feeding semiconductor lines that run on cadence, not comfort. It's pharma and cold chain moving through a climate that doesn't care about thresholds. The route is long. The failure points are short. This is the part spreadsheets miss. Globalization's rhythm is set by dozens of 3-minute moments in Malacca, overtakes, cross-traffic, pilot transfers, squall lines that cut visibility. Each one can push a vessel out of its time slot, and each missed slot ripples outward. Supply chains aren't broken by grand gestures. They're broken by the accretion of small delays that collide in a narrow place. And yet the narrative clings to steel, naval superiority, joint patrols, Piracy down this quarter, all true and only a sliver of the risk picture. The modern interdiction isn't a blockade, it's a spreadsheet that nudges compliance. An environmental hold here, a safety inspection there, a port state control ramp that suddenly needs 3 more documents. Nobody fires a shot. Transit times stretch all the same. Ask a pilot who's run the Singapore handoff at dusk. He'll tell you where fatigue blooms, inside the puzzle of overtakes and crossings at speed differentials that leave no room for improvisation. Ask a dispatcher in Yokohama who had to resequence boxes after a 2-day slip in bunkers. She'll show you penalty clauses that start at a minute and compound. Here's where the 10 trillion comes in, not as a tidy tally of goods floating in a given hour, but as exposure, the GDP, inventories and energy systems that assume Malacca works by default. East Asia's refineries, power grids and factory floors are wired to this lane. A 7-day pause isn't a short-term price spike, it's a structural wobble. Refineries throttle, LNG windows miss. Just in time becomes just too late. What nobody knew or chose not to highlight was how quickly confidence can turn. One grounded bulker, one cyber advisory, one bad fog week, and insurers signal caution. Charters hedge. Captains favor deeper water at Lombok, adding days and fuel. Every detour is a tax. The ledger breaks somewhere, usually far from the strait, in a plant that runs out of a gasket made by a supplier you've never heard of. So the lie wasn't that Malacca is unsafe. It's that safety equals openness. The strait can be open and still closed by inches, minutes, and math. That's the throttle, hidden under draft lines, Q theory, and a fatigue index nobody wants to admit they track. Keep telling yourself naval patrols guarantee flow, and you'll miss the quiet hands already on the lever. The human stake, lives built on a narrow thread. At dawn in Johor, a family watches the harbor app like weather. Farid runs a small chandlery that lives on daily port calls, gloves, filters, hose clamps, paid in cash by deck crews who'll be gone by midnight. His wife Nur tracks bunker shifts. When Singapore's refineries tighten allocations, ships linger on anchor and Farid's day collapses. On good weeks, 3 launches a morning. On bad weeks, 2 phone calls and a promise. The rent, the school fees, the aging van that carries crates to the jetty, they all run on the strait's pulse. 20 miles down the coast, a fisherman named Rizzle times his nets to the freighter wakes. Big hulls roll a swell that stirs the shoals. Some days it brings fish, some days it rips nets and leaves oil ribbons that stain his palms. His father learned tides by moon. Rizzle reads ship schedules and insurance notices. A fuel surcharge in Singapore means fewer trips to sea, more time fixing gear he can't afford to replace. When a spill drifts close, he stands on the breakwater, eyes on the current, calculating whether to risk a day's diesel for half a catch. In Jurong, CT punches into a refinery gate before the sun lifts. Her shift runs the distillation unit that feeds the world's bunkers. She jokes that she's fueling ships she never sees. Her real clock is the shift roster on an app, green dots for steady runs, amber for throttles. An amber week cuts overtime and tightens everything at home. 2 daughters, a mother with diabetes, a borrowed car. When arrivals hiccup, her manager announces conservation protocols. That means careful draws from tanks and longer nights, and the text she hates sending, "I'll be late." Aboard a 13,000 TEU box ship, sliding past Tanjung Pelepas, Danilo, a Filipino chief mate, keeps one eye on the ECDIS and one on a handheld radio. The AIS picture looks clean. The voice on the pilot channel doesn't sound right. He cross-checks with the harbor frequency, finds the discrepancy, and calls the captain to the bridge. Later he shrugs it off, false call, corrected in time, but sleeps badly, replaying the 2 minutes before the correction, the way the tide set them half a cable off their line. He doesn't tell his family, he talks about the food instead. In Shah Alam, May manages a line that supplies gaskets to a Tier 2 auto plant. Her life is a spreadsheet of lead times. 1 gasket delivered late and a robot pauses. 20 minutes later a floor manager calls. 2 hours later there's a penalty note in her inbox. She watches the anchorage cameras when she should be sleeping. The queue length looks normal. The arrival ETA slipped by 1 hour. Can she shuffle a truck? What nobody warns you, she says, is how many lives are lived between on time and too late. In Penang, a chip fab manager, Aravind, holds 2 days of specialty gases in reserve, and pretends he's calm. The litho tools cost more than a skyscraper. Their rhythm does not tolerate maybe. His team adjusts recipes to stretch yields when a cylinder arrives warm. He writes heroic emails about resilience and carries a private fear about one missed slot at Malacca cascading into a shutdown he can't spin. On Batam, Ika, a dispatcher for a feeder service, stares at boxes stacked like a city block. She's good at math. She can tell you which client will scream first, which consignee has no buffer, which reefer needs a plug in the next hour. When the pilot calls, squall line, visibility down, delay 80 minutes, she breathes out, opens the penalty ledger, and starts haggling. In a squall off Dumai, a Sumatran pilot stands in rain like needles, 2 bad options in front of him: hold station and risk a set toward a sand wave he doesn't trust, or commit to the channel on instruments and a tired helmsman. He chooses the channel, rides the squall's shoulder, and only later thinks about his kids' school fees and how close, routine, came to reportable. These aren't headlines, they're the quiet arithmetic that keeps households upright. A 3-minute slip here, a 1-meter draft margin there, and a Johor shop skips a week's cash, a Penang fab pays air freight, a refinery cancels overtime. The strait isn't an abstract risk. It's a thread woven through paychecks, dinners, insulin refills, rent. When it trembles, people do. Root cause history, how a shortcut became a single point of failure. To understand why inches and minutes can threaten economies, go back to when this lane was just a rumor threaded between empires. The Strait of Malacca was a spice road first, junk fleets and dhows riding monsoon arcs between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Geography handed traders a cheat: hug the peninsula, slip through a narrow cut, and shave weeks off a voyage. Empire turned the shortcut into doctrine. Portuguese charts, Dutch forts, British coal stations, each power-hardened habits into infrastructure. The logic never changed. Time saved here pays everywhere else. Steam finished the job. Coaling points became port cities. Dredging turned tidal flats into approach channels. The Straits of Malacca and Singapore were formalized into the SOMES regime, traffic separation schemes, mandatory pilotage in tight reaches, and a network of lights and buoys that let steel move like clockwork. None of it planned a world of 400-meter container ships and LNG carriers running onto the minute windows. It assumed growth would fit inside the grooves colonial charts carved. Then tankers got big. VLCCs and ULCCs pushed drafts toward the seabed, while the seabed pushed back. Bathymetry didn't care about the industry's appetite. Shallow sills, sand waves, and shifting shoals meant every generation of hulls had less margin. Instead of expanding redundancy, the region doubled down on throughput. Singapore rose as a mega-hub, refining, bunkering, and transshipment layered into a choreography that made delay a kind of profanity. Every improvement tightened the tempo. Capacity expanded by rules as much as earthworks. The traffic separation scheme drew lanes across water the way highways pin lines on land, baking assumptions into procedure. Ships staggered across pinch points by class and speed. It worked beautifully until it didn't. The human brain handles complexity poorly at scale, and this system kept adding ships, not slack. A single misread at a cross, a missed call in haze, forced everyone behind to inherit the mistake. Law added a second rail the industry rides to this day. UNCLOS gave ships transit rights through straits used for international navigation, freedom in principle, but bounded by coastal states, responsibilities for safety and the environment. Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore sit on either bank. Their incentives align enough to keep traffic safe and clean, and diverge just enough to complicate rapid changes. Any fix, more dredging, new separation, deeper drafts, needs coordination across 3 capitals, 3 electorates, and a neighborhood wary of outside pressure. The legal tightrope assumes calm seas and smooth politics. Meanwhile, trade density outran risk buffers. The post-war boom pushed Japan, then South Korea, Taiwan, and China into manufacturing engines wired to imported energy and exported goods. Malacca wasn't an optional route, it was the central vein. Ports scaled up crane by crane, yard densities thickened, transshipment hit new highs. But contingency planning lagged because the economics punished slack. Holding spare berth time felt like waste. Holding extra fuel felt like cost. The system optimized away its cushions. Technology made the strait look safer than it was. Radar, AIS, ECDIS, satellite weather, layers of visibility wrapped around a geography that still punishes error. The confidence those tools inspired nudged operators to squeeze more from the same water. In a paradox that repeats across industries, safety gear bought margin that was promptly spent on volume. The result, a corridor that handles more than it should, with less room than it needs. History's cruel twist is that success concentrated risk. Every decade of reliability raised the stakes for the next one. Supply chains calibrated to Malacca's cadence. Refineries were built where bunkers and ships already were. Ports bet on being the node everyone must touch. The shortcut hardened into dependence. That's how a spice lane became a single point of failure, by doing its job too well, for too long, under rules written for calmer times. The geography that cheats time and punishes error. To see why this lane saves weeks yet steals seconds, start at the bottom. The seabed here isn't a floor, it's a conveyor. Shallow sills link from the Andaman Sea through Malacca to Singapore, with sand waves migrating like slow storms. Sumatra's rivers push sediment east, monsoons shove it south, and the channel's tightest reaches inherit the drift. Charts mark depths, the water keeps rewriting them. Pilots talk about a living bottom, shoals that rise a handspan over a season and erase a meter in a night of bad weather. Underkeel clearance narrows not on paper, but in the exact moment a swell meets a tide. Above that shifting base is weather that lies low and sudden. Haze blown off peat fires collapses visibility to a grey arm's length. Squalls arrive as curtains, fine 1 minute, white water the next. Monsoon shifts flip wind and current, turning a planned overtake into an argument with inertia. Radar reflects rain, AIS shows intention, but the eye still carries the last veto. In that corridor between Port Klang and Singapore, haze plus rain plus a 20-knot set can steal confidence from the best bridge team. You feel it when the bright panel glow doesn't match the dark water ahead. Then the geometry tightens. Traffic separation lanes look generous on a briefing slide and claustrophobic through a wheelhouse window. Speed differentials stack risk. A tanker at 13 knots, a box ship at 18, a coastal feeder at 9, a ferry cutting across at 25. Add fishing boats edging the boundaries and pilot boats darting in the gaps, and you get a board crowded with pieces that don't share the same rules. Overtakes require choreography, a call to VTS, a check on cross-traffic, a glance at the echo of a small hull hidden in a rain cell. The move takes 3 minutes, the consequences last days. Fatigue blooms in predictable places. The approaches to Singapore's eastern anchorage, the Phillips Channel handoff, the Tanjung Piai bend, zones where calls stack and margins thin. Bridge teams pass the same phrase back and forth, keep it tidy, while the mental ledger tallies CPA, set, draft, and what the pilot just hinted at but didn't say. A clean passage here is performance art. A stumble is physics. Depth meets draft in the most unforgiving arithmetic. A fully loaded VLCC can ride at 20 meters in a stretch that charts at 23. That leaves a cushion smaller than a swell face. Tide gives you an hour of grace, a squall takes it back. The pilot's craft is part hydrology, part patience. Wait for the right height, commit with enough power to command the rudder, and trust that the sand wave on yesterday's sounding hasn't walked. Meanwhile, a container giant behind you wants the same slot, and a LNG carrier ahead can't fudge its time because boil-off is a clock that charges interest. Singapore's handoff multiplies the stakes. This isn't just a strait, it's the doorstep to a megahub. Transshipment windows run like metronomes. Every arrival that slips forces a yard resequence, a tug reassignment, a key shuffle. The harbor is built to absorb chaos, but even elasticity has limits. When nature nibbles at those limits, haze day followed by squall night followed by a sandwave rumor, the choreography shows its strain. Lines of light on anchorage decks become rows of waiting, each bulb a crew counting hours against a schedule that punishes drift. Meanwhile, sideways currents work their small treasons. Tidal eddies off headlands set ships half a cable from intended tracks. On ECDIS, you're on the line. In water, you're working back to it. A helmsman corrects, the heel answers, the speed breathes. The pilot's palm measures you're like a metronome. You don't feel time passing until the VHF brings a request from astern. Captain, any chance on 2 more knots? that's geometry turning into pressure. The paradox is cruel. The same features that make this corridor the fastest route, shortcut, sheltered seas, proximity to the hub, combine to punish error, shallows that shave distance steal depth, weather that rarely blows a gale prefers to blind, density that saves days steals seconds. The Strait cheats time for the world by demanding perfection from the few people steering steel through its tightest turns. So what do mariners do? They stack redundancies, parallel index lines on the radar, cross-checks between AIS and plot, call early, call again. They carry mental maps of where sand waves usually sleep and where haze tends to lurk. They also know the secret everyone else learns late. This place is a negotiation, not a guarantee. You bargain with tide for a foot, with wind for a degree, with traffic for a minute. And every bargain is fragile. A degree late on the rudder, a knot shy on the engine, a voice on the radio that isn't who you think, and the Strait collects its rent. Not with drama, but with subtlety. A nudge, a delay, a scratch on a hull that wasn't there yesterday. Multiply that across hundreds of transits, and you see the hidden cost of geography that helped the world cheat a calendar. It doesn't erase physics. It asks you to respect them, or siltation, phantom islands, and draft math. Here's where things get interesting. What nobody sees at cruising speed is how the bottom rises to meet you. Silt doesn't arrive like a storm, it settles like a rumor. Sumatra's rivers push fine grains into suspension, monsoon pulses herd them along the axis of the lane, and sand waves migrate under the keel like slow animals. A pilot will tell you the seabed here keeps its own calendar. 1 week you've got a clean 23 meters. Next week you've got 22 and a sand hump where the contour used to be smooth. In a channel this narrow, 5 miles at Phillips, those phantom islands aren't folklore, they're draft math. Budgets argue with that drift. Dredging is expensive, messy, and political. Every pass steals hours from traffic and relocates a problem that never quits. So operators aim for good enough, and good enough shrinks when drafts creep up. On paper, there's clearance. In practice, a meter of silt and a half meter of swell erase the margin you thought you owned. Then there are the phantom islands, shoals that exist seasonally, feel solid on a lead line, and vanish by the time a chart update lands. Fishermen know them by feel. Pilots hear about them third hand. There's a bump south of the Red Can, took a scratch yesterday. Nobody wants to log it as a hazard unless they have to. Meanwhile, the rumor moves steel. Draft math turns gossip into risk. A loaded tanker at 20.5 meters in a 23-meter reach looks fine until you add squat, the hydrodynamic sinkage that steals clearance when a hull moves fast in shallow water. At 12 knots, that's another 0.5 to 1 meter. Now tide, maybe you misjudged by 20 minutes, the flood hasn't given you the extra handspan yet. Then a passing wake stacks a little wave over a low patch. On the bridge, nothing looks wrong. Under the keel, soft sand kisses steel. If you're lucky, you feel a shiver. If you're not, you plow. AIS traces don't show this. ECDIS layers don't warn you the hump moved 3 cables east since the last sounding. The bottom doesn't update on an app. It negotiates with rain upstream, wind last night, and dredgers who didn't get their full allowance this quarter. A pilot's eyes sit at the end of that negotiation with a tug on standby and a schedule that won't forgive a pause. Now multiply by traffic. A single deep draft transit through a pinched reach forces everyone behind to space out, reduce speed, and wait for the same height of tide. A morning tide window missed becomes an afternoon tidal race for slots that were never meant to stack. Berth windows assume a bell curve of arrivals. Siltation flattens that curve and shifts it right. Yard planners reach for coffee and contingency spreadsheets. Phantom islands also play tricks with human behavior. Mariners avoid the spot they heard about and crowd the lane they trust, deepening scours on one side and letting the other side fill. The channel becomes a self-fulfilling shapeshifter, trained by fear and habit. Dredgers come in later and straighten the bend, but only until the next monsoon instructs the sand to try something new. Charts carry disclaimers that mariners read and forget. Seabed subject to change, recent shoaling reported, soundings approximate. Those caveats don't fit neatly into a container terminal's cutoffs or an LNG slot's fee structure. So bridge teams add analog safeguards, parallel index lines, echo sounder alarms, a lookout's instinct for the tone of water against a hull. The fixes feel old because the problem is old. Physics hasn't learned to email. Shallowing also reshapes speed. At low clearance, squat grows with the square of speed, so the math pushes captains to slow. Slower passages mean longer exposure to cross sets and more time for weather to misbehave. A 4-hour leg becomes 5. That hour doesn't vanish. It shows up as an anchorage that looks like a parking lot and a bunkering roster that tilts. Insurance notices tiptoe around the word grounding and talk about contact with the seabed. Underwriters price that phrase now. Ports circulate draft advisories that sound polite and mean don't come heavy. Terminals ask for pre-arrival declarations with decimals that make mariners wince. A tenth of a meter can decide whether you burn fuel to lighten, wait for tide, or convince a dispatcher to forgive a penalty. Meanwhile, AIS anomalies spread like static. Ships ghost, a few cables left of their true line when a receiver hiccups, or a spoofing event blankets a section with false echoes. In tight water, that's enough to nudge nerves. A pilot commits to the center, a following master mirrors the choice, a third vessel overcorrects. The human echo builds on the hydrographic one. Here's the quiet punchline. The strait doesn't need a blockade to choke. It only needs a few centimeters to go missing where steel plans to pass. That loss can be seasonality, neglect, or just an unlucky marriage of tide and wake. The outcome is the same: drafts trimmed, speeds cut, windows missed. From a satellite, traffic still flows. On a ledger, penalties and premiums accrete like silt. Ask the dredge foreman who logs soundings at dawn. He'll tell you which reach wants attention and which budget line won't stretch. Ask the pilot who felt a brush where last month was clear. He'll mark it on his mental chart and whisper it on the radio. That's how this place talks: granular, local, imprecise. And that's how a global system learns late that its narrowest point is narrower than it thinks. Threat stack, Piracy 2, cyber hijacking and insurance shock. While the bottom rises in silence, something else is reaching for the bridge. The new boarding party doesn't need a ladder, it needs a login. In Malacca's density, Piracy 2 looks like clean dashboards telling small lies, an AIS target holding steady when the set is dragging you cross-lane, a pilot call sign that sounds right but isn't, an email from port control with a PDF attachment your mate opens because he's tired and the clock says 03:17. Start with spoofing. AIS, the light that makes the sea legible, is also a soft spot. Transponders shout identity and intent into crowded ether. In the narrows, a bad actor can inject a phantom echo or shift your own return a few cables sideways. On screen, you're fine. In water, you're drifting toward a shoal. The correction comes late because the eye hesitates to override a machine it trusts. A minute lost to doubt in this lane is a mile of consequence. Then the bridge itself, the ECDIS that replaced paper charts and made updates routine. Most days it's a miracle. On a bad day, it's a blindfold somebody else tide. Malware doesn't need to crash the system to win. It only has to freeze a layer or delay a correction. A pilot asks you to confirm a depth contour. You zoom in and the shading stutters, or the alert banner that should have fired stays quiet. You hedge on speed. The overtake behind you fails. Now a dozen schedules wobble because a process was nudged, not broken. The voice channel is a seam too. VTS and piloted share air crowded with accents and urgency. A clipped instruction in haze: alter starboard, maintain 14 knots, lands with authority if the call sign matches a known pattern. Spoof that and you don't seize a ship. You borrow its confidence at the one moment it can't spare it. 1 degree the wrong way, 2 minutes too long, and the captain who did everything by the book writes an incident report in a port he didn't intend to visit. Ransomware lurks further back, in offices that schedule entire fleets. A shoreside outage cascades quietly at sea. Route optimizers go dark, fuel hedges freeze, weather avoidance tools stall. In recent years, operators reported sharp rises in attempted intrusions against voyage and port systems, enough that insurers added cyber exclusions with teeth. Masters revert to conservative plans, which in this corridor means slower speeds and wider gaps. The port downstream doesn't see the hack. It sees a trickle instead of a flow and assumes caution. The effect is identical to a fog week. Arrivals bunch, berths bruise, tempers rise. Meanwhile, old-school boardings haven't vanished. Small boats still probe anchorages at night, leaning on routine and fatigue. But the smarter play is hybrid. Jam a GPS window, force a ship to hold position longer than planned, then show up when deck patrols thin. Steal laptops and hard drives, not just paint and rope. Information becomes cargo. A crew list, a call schedule, a bunker plan, sold to someone who can make better mischief with it later. Insurers watch all this with a pencil that sharpens at every headline. War risk add-ons used to be a map. Now they're a mood, a cluster of armed robberies and a cyber advisory in the same quarter, and premiums tick up mid-voyage. Cyber exclusions arrive with cheerful language that boils down to, if a keyboard caused it, you're on your own. Owners push back. Underwriters point to loss models that show how one compromised ECDIS in a conv costs more than a dozen stolen phones. Banks and charters aren't far behind. A week with 3 near groundings in haze, a warning from a maritime agency about spoofing clusters, and the spreadsheets start to whisper, Lombok. The longer route costs days and fuel, but it buys certainty. Enough operators make that choice and Malacca's pain becomes Singapore's, then Busan's, then Long Beach's. The tax isn't on security, it's on time. Factories don't invoice hours, they eat them. Crew psychology tightens the threaded needle. Fatigue plus fear plus conflicting orders equals incident risk. A mate who's read 3 circulars about spoofing is now second-guessing every call. A captain juggling company security notices, VTS instructions, and a pilot's cadence hesitates at the wrong moment. Add a rumor about an insurer denying a cyber-linked claim last month, and you get decisions made to avoid blame, not optimize safety. That's how near misses become misses. Lloyd's signaling matters in bad weeks. A shift from advisory to elevated ripples like a weather front. Some owners pause transits, others demand escorts. ISBS levels creep up. Port state control gets sticky, environmental holds, safety slow walks, paperwork hunts. In gray zones, rules are levers. No one says blockade, everyone feels delay. Here's the quiet endgame. You don't need to close the strait to break the chain. You need to raise friction just enough that risk models tell rational actors to go around. Cyber nudges, spoofed voices, ransomware on shore, and a handful of night boardings at anchor stack them, and Malacca throttles itself. In the logbooks, there's no villain. In the ledgers, there's a hole. Ask Danilo, the chief mate who caught the false call in time. He'll tell you it felt like nothing, a twitch saved by habit. Ask his owner's broker. She'll show you a premium graph climbing on weeks like that. Ask the plant manager watching ETAs slip by hours. She doesn't care why the delay happened, only that the gasket isn't here. That's the threat stack, quiet, cumulative, and priced into every decision made in a corridor where a centimeter and a second now carry a surcharge. The energy death spiral, oil, gas, and the 7-day rule. Here's the rule nobody wants to write down. East Asia can absorb noise for days, but at 7, energy stops pretending. Japan, South Korea, and much of coastal China pull their lifeblood through this lane, crude for refineries, LNG for grids that coast through peak demand on turbines that weren't built to wait. The math hums in control rooms from Yokohama to Incheon, days of cover, draw rates, refill uncertainty. Malacca shifts from geography to countdown. Start with oil. Refineries in Singapore, Japan, and South Korea sit wired to shipments that batch arrive by tide and contract. They hedge with crude on water, but tanks aren't a bottomless promise. Miss a week and managers throttle runs to protect product slates. Gasoline yields drop first, then middle distillates. Aviation fuel allotments tighten. An airline ops team in Narita gets a quiet call, tankering where you can. Freight forwarders feel it in freight quotes that twitch by cents, then jump by dollars. LNG is meaner. Cargoes aren't flexible inventory, they're moving clocks. Boil-off eats the margin, and receiving terminals assign slots like landing clearances. A 36-hour slip tumbles downstream. A carrier circles outside Tokyo Bay burning its own cargo. A terminal bumps a ship to protect safety windows. A downstream grid operator watches reserve margins thin and calls a peaker. That peaker, gas-fired, fast to start, was the plan for heat waves and cold snaps, not uncertainty stacked by a narrow strait. 7 days without confidence, and the dispatch curve warps. Old coal units wobble back online. Diesel gensets hum behind factory walls. Emissions go up to keep lights on. Here is how the cascade looks on a desk in Yokohama. Day 1, advisories, monitoring the strait. Day 2, bunker chatter, tight at Singapore, conserve where possible. Day 3, suppliers float optionality fees, a refinery trims runs, product traders bid quietly. Day 4, LNG schedulers call counterparts to swap slots, A single missing ship forces 2 ports to invent choreography. Day 5, strategic stock managers open the binder. Draw rates are numbers you don't say out loud because they become headlines. Day 6, grid planners draft contingency curves for evening peaks, call industry for voluntary demand response, warm peakers that haven't spun in months. Day 7, the rule. Refineries cut to protect hardware, peakers run longer, industrial customers get polite calls with firm undertones. Prices stop being whispers and turn into pings you hear in consumer bills. Strategic stocks look like comfort until you read the small print. Japan and South Korea hold crude, not finished products, and crude in caverns doesn't fly itself into a distillation column. Draws require timing, blending, and a replacement schedule that assumes the strait unclenches soon. LNG stocks aren't really stocks at all, limited storage in tanks designed for days, not weeks. You can regasify faster for an evening. You can't manufacture molecules that never sailed. Futures markets hear the timbre shift before the public does. The curve flips on rumors, contango blooms when prompt cargoes go scarce, or backwardation sharpens when everyone wants now not later. Refineries hedge and discover hedges don't boil, then pass signals to marketers who dribble them into pump prices. Traders with optionality on ships and slots name numbers. Owners of flexible LNG portfolios become the central bank of heat. Upstream, producers watch with detachment and intent. Middle East crudes tied to Asia benchmarks perk up. West African barrels reprice for detours. Russian pipeline math looks better on someone's spreadsheet in Beijing, because every barrel that doesn't worry about Malacca is a barrel you don't have to explain to a plant manager staring at a 7-day rule. Meanwhile, ships do what they can. Captains slow steam to save bunkers in a Singapore squeeze, lengthening voyages and tightening schedules. Tankers favor Lombok to avoid the rumor of a foggy week nudged by a cyber advisory. Each prudent choice taxes time. Each tax rolls into the grid's evening peak and a dispatcher's headache. Procured megawatts turn theoretical. In a refinery control room on Jurong Island, CT watches her unit's rates slide. Cut too fast and you risk thermal stress. Cut too slow and you risk running out of crude charge in the wrong tank sequence. She taps a screen, signals a 5% trim, and texts home about milk on the way. Outside, bunker barges idle under cranes that don't lift. The silence sounds like caution. In Seoul, a grid planner toggles between fuel inventories and weather. A heat dome next week would break them. He signs a demand response notice he hoped he'd never need. The message to factories lands polite, with consequences implied. On the pier at Sodgora, dock workers watch a Q-Flex LNG carrier hold offshore, then swing wide. The rumor at lunch, they're swapping slots up north. No one says the word shortage. Everyone feels schedule turning into physics. 7 days isn't apocalypse. It's the point where systems designed for efficiency admit they're brittle. After that, you burn credit, in tanks, in trust, in air quality to buy time. The death spiral isn't sirens. It's throttles, peakers, surcharges, and a night where a dispatcher stares at a megawatt gap and decides which neighborhood sleeps hot. Factory Asia on pause. Semis, autos, and the $1 delay equals $100 loss. Factories don't crash with a bang here, they stall on a whisper. In H. Sinchu, a lithography bay hums at 3 a.m., lights cold and steady over machines that don't blink. The cadence is sacred. Resist coated, exposure, develop, etch, repeat. A pallet of specialty gases is due at dawn. The driver texts, anchorage delay, ETA plus 6H. 6 hours isn't a shrug, it's a recipe rewrite. Process engineers huddle over SBC charts, shaving margins to keep defect density from drifting. They can stretch for a shift. 2. The scrap curve starts to climb. Get this, semiconductor timing lives in batches, not boxes. A single lot misses its window on a stepper, and you don't slip 1 hour, you lose sequence. Downstream tools wait with vacuum held, burning throughput while idle. A fab manager has 2 choices: push a low confidence recipe and eat yield, or freeze a bay and cascade the delay across stations. Either way, that late cylinder from a ship stuck a day outside Malacca just turned into a week of bled output. 1 gasket of gas, $100,000 in wafer value, multiplied by every lot that needed that chemical at that hour. While litho tools are their own supply chain beast, new EUV stages ride in custom crates that deserve a name and a seatbelt. They transit through the same choke, booked into port windows choreographed to crane teams and cleanroom openings. Bounce that crate by 48 hours and you miss a bi-weekly rigging slot. Rebooking isn't a calendar event. It's payroll, contractor availability, ISO recertification, and a sterile airstream that was supposed to be perfect Tuesday, not Thursday. The tool sits, the launch slides, marketing smiles turn thin. Over in Suzhou, a Tier 2 supplier stamps a bracket that looks boring and holds an EV battery module in place at 140 kilometers per hour. Their steel coils arrived on time. The sealant from Japan didn't. A shipping manager points at a map of the strait like it's the moon. With one material late, their line still runs until the next workstation where a robot waiting for that sealant pauses. The stoppage counter starts, penalties tick, and the OEM's supplier improvement team wants a call before lunch. The manager offers air freight on emergency cartons. The buyer nods, then writes the invoice that hurts. $1 delay, $100 loss. Because the $1 was a gasket, the $100 was the idle people, the reslotting, and the reputation you just dented. Automotive cadence is a metronome, not a rhythm section. A row/row into Yokohama was meant to hit a Sunday tide, forklift staged, pre-delivery inspection teams standing by. The berth is booked in 20-minute slices. When the ship slips to Monday morning, Saturday overtime becomes Sunday idling. Customs officers clock off. Rail slots move to someone else. Cars sit on decks under a sun that bakes dashboards and shames schedules. Downline dealers advertise launches that now feel like apologies. Tier N fragility is where the math gets mean. A Tier 1 supplier in Nagoya tells the OEM they're fine, inventory buffered, capacity ready. A Tier 3 in Johor, never on the OEM's radar, was waiting on a pallet of O-rings coming through Singapore. It missed the transshipment window when bunkers tightened. Nobody upstream notices until a caulking robot throws a fault. 10 minutes to diagnosis, 6 hours to workaround, 2 weeks to never again, and 6 months later someone writes, dual source, in a slide deck like that solves geography. Warehouse math pretends to be rational. Buffer inventory ties up cash and ages fast in semis where nodes change and in autos where colors and specs drift like fashion. So finance applauds lean. In normal weeks it sings. In a Malacca week it backfires. A fab's 2-day buffer evaporates against a 7-day straight. An automaker's hours of cover turns into a factory tour with quiet lines. The CFO stares at days sales outstanding while the COO stares at days missing materials. Everyone promises to carry more stock. Everyone forgets in the next quarter's earnings call. Contract law joins in with a grin. Liquidated damages clauses were written for storms and strikes. Now hydrology exceptions creep into boilerplate, force majeure for a strait that was open, just slow. Lawyers argue over whether a sand wave counts. Meanwhile, factory planners live in the only court that matters, today's shift. They slice overtime, swap routings, call favored shippers for miracles, and trade favors they'll pay back later with someone else's bottleneck. Then there's the unseen. Test houses in Penang awaiting chiplets for burn-in, adhesive vendors in Kaohsiung that need cold chain adhesive precursors, glass carriers in Osaka whose perfect flats are scratched by one rough berth because a tug was late to a ship that was late to a strait. Each scratch isn't a crisis, it's a rework. Each rework isn't a headline, it's capacity lost to a moment of friction. A manager in Incheon sums it in one line: we don't run out of parts, we run out of time. The $1 delay isn't money, it's the 4 phone calls you didn't plan to make, the truck you rebooked at surge rates, the second choice flight with a layover that misses a customs window, the QA hold because the label's smudged in a hurry. Multiply across factory Asia and you hear the throttle clack shut not with a clank, but with calendars shifting 10 minutes, 100 times a day, because a narrow strait said no softly. Reroutes that do save you. When Malacca tightens, the map looks generous. Spin the globe and the exits glow, Lombok, Makassar to the east, Sunda to the south, overland dreams across Thailand, even an Arctic summer line scrawled on glossy slides. On paper, each buys freedom. In practice, each charges a toll you only feel when the invoice hits fuel tanks, schedules, and nerves. Start with Lombok, Makassar. It's deep and wide, a blue ribbon east of Java that clears VLCC drafts without the Malacca pinch. Captains like the depth. Owners don't like the math. The detour adds days. A box ship on a Shanghai-Rotterdam string absorbs 4 to 7 depending on weather and port windows. Those aren't just calendar squares. They're bunkers burned, hundreds of tons a day at $500 per ton, and crews extended past relief thresholds. Slow steaming to cushion fuel multiplies the delay. Berth windows at Colombo, Salalah, Jeddah slide. Yard stacks build where they weren't supposed to. The fix staggers the network it's meant to spare. Sunda looks closer. It's the proximate cut between Sumatra and Java, a shortcut's shortcut. Then the pilot book opens and the optimism thins. Shallower reaches pinch drafts, currents curl weirdly around Krakatoa's broken rim, and volcanic ash plays tricks with echo sounders after a restless week. Deep draft tankers skip it on principle. Container giants avoid it when the swell runs. A string that bets on Sunda 1 week is back at Lombok the next, paying twice, once in fuel, once in credibility. Overland plans wear hard hats and carry ribbon cutters. The Thai land bridge pitches a 90-kilometer corridor linking Chumpphon on the Gulf to Ranong on the Andaman, 2 deepwater ports, a 6-hour rail or road lift, and voila, a Malacca bypass without digging the isthmus. It's elegant at a distance. Up close, double handling kills the magic. Boxes off ship onto yard, onto train, off train onto yard, onto ship. Each hop adds risk, cost, and time. Whether over the passes, labor calendars, customs behavior at 2 gates instead of none. A transshipment giant like Singapore spends billions to shave minutes from similar moves. Recreating that reliability across mountains asks more than concrete can promise. The century-old Kra Canal dream still surfaces like a leviathan, cut the peninsula, sails straight. The price tag floats in the tens of billions. Siltation would punch you in the budget forever. Insurgency risk in the south adds a human variable, and geopolitics snaps its teeth. Who finances controls leverage, who dredges owns the headache. Even if someone built it, the learning curve would teach hard lessons in the first decade, shoals where nobody expected, insurers circling, a hub next door adjusting fees and services to defend its crown. Bypass as Pandora's box. The Arctic seduces with geometry. A melted summer turns Rotterdam, Shanghai into a shorter line through the northern sea route. Icebreakers carve lanes, transit times drop by a week. Then reality walks in wearing a parka. Seasonality forbids planning. Insurance treats the route like a dare. Sanctions and politics lace the chart with uncertainty. 1 ship makes it through, 10 wait for weather, 100 clients ask whether their boxes become headlines. That's not a backbone, it's a stunt. People pivot to pipes and rails across continents. Russian pipelines sidestep Malacca for crude and gas, and they help if your factory drinks molecules that fit a pipe. Electronics don't. Neither do cars, cocoa, or 1,000 SKUs that feed containerization. Rail across Eurasia beats a plane on price and a ship on speed for a sliver of goods. Scale breaks it. A major string's weekly volume can swallow a month of trains. Land fantasies are always true somewhere and useless everywhere else. The real math, every detour is a tax. Fuel, crew, insurance, port fees, yard congestion, safety margins. String planners can hide it for a week. Quarterlies don't. Shippers who thought they escaped Malacca pay at different desks. A Lombok detour squeezes transshipment hubs that weren't staffed for the surge. A land bridge bleeds reliability into a place built on it. An Arctic adventure returns as a case study in lessons learned. There's also the catch nobody markets. Networks remember, once a loop stretches to avoid trouble, shrinking it back takes guts. Crews want predictable reliefs. Ports that hired for a temporary surge write contracts. Regulators who granted exceptions add conditions. Insurers bake caution into premiums. If Malacca clears and you still run Lombok, you're hedging with someone else's money, usually a plant manager. Ask Ika, the Batam dispatcher. Her feeder missed a Singapore window because the mother ship chose Lombok. She rerouted 3 boxes through Port Klang, paid a trucker to catch a barge, and called a consignee to apologize. Her spreadsheet grew new columns for detour risk. Ask Aravind in Penang. His gas cylinder flew business class that week. He told finance it was cheaper than idle litho tools. He didn't mention the small panic behind the calm. Here's the part that matters. Plan B isn't fake, it's finite. In a world built on Malacca's cadence, reroutes by breath, not immunity, The exits exist, none are free, few are ready to carry the life we've loaded onto a strait that was never designed for this much faith. The Kra Canal Gambit, bypass or Pandora's box. Every few years, the old idea stands up, dusts itself off, and promises salvation. Carve Thailand's narrow waist, link the Andaman to the Gulf, and let ships slip past Malacca forever. The Kra Canal isn't new. It's a centuries-old daydream with modern numbers, hundreds of kilometers surveyed, tens of billions penciled, a timeline that always says next decade. On a map it looks simple. A straight cut across the Kra Isthmus shaves days, dodges sand waves, and unhooks energy flows from a strait that punishes error. Advocates pull out slide decks, 120 kilometers, twin channels, deep drafts that welcome VLCCs and box giants alike, industrial zones on either side soaking up value. They talk in verbs engineers like dig, dredge, build, and point to the payoff. Singapore's grip loosens, insurance smiles, and Southeast Asia becomes the hinge of a new loop. Now ask the questions the map mutes. Who pays? Whoever writes the check doesn't just buy concrete, they buy leverage. Financing from Beijing ties the canal to belt and road logistics, port concessions, and security assistance. Money from a Gulf logistics giant buys a corridor aligned with neutral capital but anchored to global terminals strategy. A Japanese or Indian stake reshapes routing, spreads risk, and answers Malacca with a counterweight. Every option rewrites alliances. Thailand knows this, which is why the canal keeps reappearing as study, not shovel. Costs don't stop at cash. Geology demands depth. Digging a sea-level canal through granite ridges means moving mountains, literally. Siltation follows like a bill that never stops arriving. Monsoon-fed runoff would dump sediment into the cut. Dredgers would live there and still fall behind some years. Add insurgency risk in Thailand's deep south, roads and work camps become targets, and you've got a project that needs a security plan before it pours the first slab. Insurance underwriters won't gloss any of that with a premium line. They'll price it into every hull that dares the first decade. Then there's ecology. A canal would stitch two marine systems together and let species travel where they shouldn't, while inland it would slice watersheds, displace villages, and raise salinity in aquifers that feed farms. Environmental approvals would read like a saga. Protests would follow bulldozers. Courts would learn the new vocabulary of irreversible. Slogans on t-shirts would turn into injunctions on desks. Time isn't just money here, it's resistance. Singapore's calculus is simpler and ruthless. It's the world's bunkering crown and transshipment metronome because Malacca funnels the world to its door. A rival artery next door threatens the choreography it perfected. Expect quiet countermoves, cut fees to keep strings loyal, raise service levels, faster crane rates, better yard AI, priority berthing for committed lines, bundle insurance and pilotage with a smile. The hub doesn't panic. It prices competitors out of breath. Thailand senses the heat and offers a softer pitch. Forget the canal, too hard, too costly, meet the land bridge. Two deepwater ports, Ranong on the Andaman, Chumpphon on the Gulf, linked by a 90-kilometer corridor of rails and roads. 6 hours coast to coast, one lift-off ship, one lift-on. It dodges siltation, shrinks geopolitical risk, and spreads contracts across domestic firms. Less romance, more logistics, but double handling is the vampire that never dies. Each lift adds time and damage risk. Weather closes passes when ships would have sailed, labor calendars clash with tides, and customs stamps creep. It will work, sometimes beautifully. It will also fail when a box that mattered most ends up on the wrong train. If a canal opens, the chessboard sprawls. Navies redraw patrol patterns, coast guards learn new beats. Piracy, too, doesn't vanish. It migrates to new anchorages, new VTS seams, new data centers running a green corridor on tight code. Port state control regimes multiply. Standards diverge. Shippers' arbitrage rules the way traders' arbitrage spreads. Insurance finds fresh ambiguities. Who's liable at kilometer 47 becomes a courtroom sport. And yet the dream persists because the pain is real. Captains want deep water. Owners want route diversity. Governments want leverage against a choke they don't control. The canal promises a pressure release. It also threatens to fracture the patient it tries to save, pulling traffic from established hubs, inviting shadow toll wars, and forcing Southeast Asia to referee a contest of patrons with long wallets and longer memories. Here's the quiet twist. Even if Kra happens, Malacca doesn't empty. Trade grows into every lane it's given. Canal tolls will sit beside bunker surcharges, and dispatchers will discover that new shortcuts come with new 3-minute windows, new fatigue zones, new radios speaking too fast in rain. Rerouting risk is still risk. It just wears different rain. Thailand's leaders understand this, which is why the canal shifts between promise and pause. Land bridge today, committee tomorrow, shovel someday. Meanwhile, ship planners add another column to their spreadsheets, and pilots keep their hands light on the wheel through Phillips Channel. The bypass exists, for now, as leverage more than lane, useful, potent, and like all leverage, dangerous when you lean on it too hard. Naval theater without shots, A2AD by Spreadsheet. While supercarriers circle headlines, the real pressure shows up in inboxes. Gray zone influence doesn't wave flags, it stamps forms. In Malacca, the new A2AD is an administrative weather system, inspections, advisories, routing guidance that slows a fleet without ever saying stop. It starts politely. A coastal agency issues an environmental circular, heightened vigilance this month on ballast water and sulfur emissions. Perfectly reasonable. Then Port State Control rotates teams and doubles, random checks on arrivals from 2 ports. The sample size grows, berthing queues lengthen by hours, bunker plans slip. A second memo cites safety. Recent incidents require proof of ECDIS patch levels and cyber hygiene attestations. Captains call the office. Compliance emails back with templates and checklists that take a day you don't have. Meanwhile, AIS dark patterns bloom. A cluster of ships passing a headland flickers on screen, targets jump, then stabilize. A few disappear for 10 minutes in a blind patch that didn't exist last week. No one alleges interference. Operators hedge, wider CPA, slower overtakes, conservatism that expands minutes into hours. In a corridor priced to minutes, that's a lever. Legal levers multiply in the name of the sea. Pollution fines get recalibrated, calculated on declared engine loads and voyage logs cross-checked against wind. A pilot ruling tightens minimum under-keel clearance, pending new hydrographic validation. Draft-limited ships wait for better tide, then better weather, then a survey. Port State Control ramps on paper, an extra certificate here, a corrected manifest there. Each document exists for a reason. Together, applied flexibly, they become friction. Maritime NOTAMs arrive as advisories, safety zones established for drill activity, recommended avoidance of Sector X for hydrographic work, slow steaming advised in haze. They read like caution, they act like lane closures. Dispatchers redraw lines in software, planners accept longer legs as the new normal, hub windows creak. No blockade, no protest, just notices that behave like cones on a highway. No one needs to own this playbook. Competing interests simply pull similar strings. A regional authority, wary of risk, errs on the side of procedure after a near miss. A neighbor, chasing leverage in a negotiation, extends heightened safety another month. A third, defending domestic operators, prioritizes certain classes for inspection. Multiply by 3 littoral states and several port complexes, and you get a rolling fog of paperwork. Who benefits when Malacca slows? Look at the balances. An exporter with overland energy pipelines prices stability higher. A rival hub advertises shorter queues and bundled services. A state negotiating basing rights can point to congestion risk and sell cooperation as relief. Every minute that costs a ship money buys someone else an argument. The theater plays out on the bridge as caution creep. A master receives 3 advisories in a week's spoofing risk, haze limits, new pilot boarding procedures. He reduces speed at 2 pinch points, adds a half-knot buffer on CPAs, and refuses one overtake that would have been safe last year. He writes prudence in his log. A yard planner downstream writes delay. Neither mentions strategy, both enacted. Insurers amplify the script. A bulletin cites elevated cyber and safety attention in the strait. Premiums shadow the mood. Warranties require documented compliance with best practices. Owners respond with training and audits that cost days. Charterers insert clauses for administrative holds, pushing risk to operators. The spreadsheet closes the vice. Across town, a regulator explains the logic plainly. If the lane is so brittle that 3 inspections cause a jam, the problem isn't our checklists, He's not wrong, but brittle systems invite clever pressure. A2AD by Spreadsheet exploits the mismatch between complexity and capacity, turning due diligence into tempo control. In quiet rooms, dispatchers map soft corridors, strings that thread fewer harbors with fewer holds. They trade time for certainty, shifting loops toward Lombok or adjusting schedules to dodge the month when a particular agency is known to tighten. Data teams mine port call records for patterns, where do randoms cluster, which advisories correlate with lost days. They build models to predict where caution will land next, and still, a new circular surprises them on a Monday. Sovereignty games sneak into the margins. A pilotage zone expands by a mile, a traffic separation tweak forces deep draft ships into a narrower window, a voluntary reporting point becomes effectively compulsory through peer pressure. VTS voices change tone. A request sounds like an order, a suggestion like a rule. Masters comply, file polite protests, and adjust. The most unnerving part is deniability. Every single measure can be defended as safety, environment, or order. Together, they reprice time. The invisible hand on the global throttle isn't a warship. It's a form signed in a fluorescent office, a GIS polygon slid 2 cables east, a training memo that adds a checklist to a night watch. Call it the age of plausible slowdown. In Malacca, sovereignty wears the vest of a safety inspector and the badge of a VTS operator. Trade doesn't stop. It yawns, wide enough for bargaining, narrow enough to avoid headlines. And while headlines chase warships, the ledger follows minutes, turning procedure into power without a shot fired. Singapore's Hedge, Megahub under pressure. At dawn, the eastern anchorage blinks like a floating suburb, row after row of deck lights, a city waiting its turn. Singapore lives on that wait. It sells certainty to ships that can't afford doubt. But here's the tension: the hub that eats delays for breakfast is full by noon. Start with draft and berth. Keppel and Tuas promise depth and crane reach, yet there's a flaw physics won't move. Mega container ships need water and window. VLCCs want tide plus tug plus wind within limits. When Malacca tightens upstream, arrivals bunch. Berth plans that look like symphonies turn into jazz, resequencing strings, swapping bays, juggling gangs. One heavy alongside in crosswind can lock a key for an extra hour. Multiply by 5 keys, then by a day's tide. You feel the hedge fray at the edges. PSA's play is choreography at machine speed. Automation threads yard cranes and AGVs through stacks drawn like mazes. Boxes shift because a planner saw a storm line 4 hours out and pulled a cold chain cluster forward. Yard density is a weapon here, more TUs per hectare than anywhere, but every extra row shortens breath. A reefer plug missed by 10 minutes turns a banana shipment into a claim. The system's answer: predictive stowage, real-time stack reshapes, AI that cheats chaos by seconds. It works most days until the anchorage doubles and the yard goes from elegant to merely fast. Bunkering is the other crown, and it sits on shifting fuel. Singapore's distillation and blending feed the world's hulls. When upstream crude wobbles or a refinery trims runs, the bunker board tightens allocations. Captains hear it in a tone: take 600 tons, not 800. Barges queue under skyline of cranes. On a squeeze day, a captain slow steams from Tanjung Pelepers just to land at a pump before the next string. Hedge is timing, timing is fuel. You can feel the loop trying to hold itself together. Then the fuel itself changes. Methanol, then ammonia arrive not as rumors, but as hose diameters and training drills. Safety envelopes expand around bunkering points. Simultaneous operations get stricter. Exclusion zones grow teeth. A methanol transfer needs a wind profile. Ammonia adds neighbors who want a meeting before your hose opens. The port writes new playbooks. A terminal manager redraws berth plans to create clean corridors. Each precaution is rational. Together, they shave throughput off a port that wins by squeezing waste out of minutes. Underneath the cranes, there's a contingency drill that runs like muscle memory. Malacca hiccups, yard goes to storm mode. Pre-pick transshipment hot boxes, split gangs to priority strings, sprint reefer checks, delay gateouts by an hour to drain a key. Harbor pilots get resequenced. Tugs reshuffle from west to east. Dispatchers in a glass-walled room drag icons across screens like chess clocks. Hold 3, race 2, swap 5. The hedge is choreography, pressure rewrites the score. Even then, hub fragility shows. Transshipment synchrony depends on two strings making the same tide. Slip one by 90 minutes and the butterfly fails. No quick cross-ship, more yard dwell, more rehandles, more chances to bruise a box and a promise. Yard dwell is the hidden tax. A day becomes two when the stack order no longer matches the barge that just slipped its slot in Batam. You can code around that for a week, a month, and you're writing apologies. Pilots feel it on the water. A squall off Changi, visibility collapses, 3 ships call for standby tugs. The pilot launch is already on a run, the next crew is on rest. VTS juggles in haze, reduced to 8, wait at buoy, words that sound gentle and mean brace. The port's hedge is depth charts in heads, radio cadence that calms, 1,000 tiny courtesies that keep steel straight in rain. But every courtesy consumes time, and time is the currency the hub spends to stay number one. Singapore's answer is to scale again, but smarter. Suez comes online in slices, automated berths, longer keys, deeper pockets. PSA nudges strings to anchorless arrivals, feeding ships straight in with tight ETA windows to kill dwell at sea. It offers bundles. Commit to this window and we give you fuel certainty plus priority pilotage. It's a loyalty program for steel. Some lines bite. Others hedge by adding a call in Port Klang or Tanjung Pelepers. Insurance against a week when everyone lands at once. There's a ceiling every port knows and refuses to say. The Megahub can drink surplus arrivals and spit out order only so fast. When upstream Silt steals centimeters and grey zone memos steal minutes, the yard drinks both. The port's bet is that it can turn friction into revenue, sell resilience as a service while building new lanes for future fuels. The risk is simpler. If transshipment stutters, Asia's tempo drops, and the city that made a business out of unblocking the world feels blocked itself. By sunset, the eastern anchorage still glows, but the queue is shorter. A controller taps a screen and grins. The day's hedge held. Tomorrow's arrivals already look environmental tripwires. The phones start to ring. Spills and the weather pivot. The first warning doesn't sound like an alarm. It smells like smoke. By late dry season, heat fires on Sumatra push a grey lid over the strait. Visibility collapses from miles to cables. Pilots who spend careers reading water start reading audio. The hiss of rain, the thud of swell, the pitch of a tug's horn. Haze steals the last instrument you trust when tech jitters. Your eyes. Overtakes that felt routine become negotiations. VTS voices slow down. Proceed with caution is code for add minutes you don't have. Haze stacks with routine in ways charts don't show. Ferry crossings that slice lanes at dawn now appear as ghost echoes on radar. Fishing craft hug the TSS edge because that's where the sonar reads fish. A box ship, a tanker, a feeder, and a fiberglass hull all share a slice of water the width of a boulevard. One missed hail in the grey, and a near miss becomes paperwork, then delay, then a line of lights at anchorage that weren't supposed to be there. When it rains, it doesn't fix the horizon. It loads the ledger. Squalls slam the narrows in sheets. Rain clutter paints radars. ECDIS glows clean while the window is a wall of water. The set that usually nudges becomes a shove. The captain waits for the gust to pass. The pilot asks for 2 more knots to keep steerage. Both choices cost time. The tug you counted on is finishing a job that took 10 minutes longer in bad visibility. The 3-minute window shows its teeth. Then comes the slick nobody planned for. A bunker barge kisses a hull the wrong way in crosswind, and light product spills where traffic is densest. It's small hundreds of barrels and huge because boom time is tide time. Response boats sprint from Singapore, Port Klang, Batam. Booms unfurl in a choreography that eats lanes. Maritime NOTAMs carve safety zones. Ships reroute around orange arcs that drift with current. 20 vessels avoid the patch, 80 slow because of the 20. The math of a minor spill becomes hours of major delay. Cleanup windows shrink when weather plays cruel. A swell builds from a squall line, spreading sheen under booms. Skimmers want calm water, the tide wants its schedule. Environmental holds tighten. Port State Control asks masters for ballast logs and fuel transfer checklists. None of this is unreasonable. All of it compounds. An anchorage that drinks 24 arrivals now drinks 10. The rest sips slowly, engines idling, crews staring at a horizon that tastes like diesel and rain. Sea level adds a quieter pressure. High water months push tides up against keys that weren't built for this frequency. Mooring lines hum on bollards, gangways shift angles beyond safe. On a bad surge, a container yard's lowest row takes brackish kiss. Terminals pause to move stacks. Pauses ripple to pilots. A vessel that would have left at 14:00 waits for 16:30 because the berth hands needed dry concrete. Nobody says climate, everyone says unusual. Monsoon volatility warps timing. Arrival peaks that used to spread like a bell curve now bunch. A week of calm draws traffic inward. A week of squalls stalls it offshore. The rebound lands on a Tuesday night that was supposed to be ordinary. Yard density spikes. Storm mode runs on days without storms. Planners pre-pick boxes, tug pools shuffle, and yard cranes stretch cycles because reefer checks multiplied in hot haze. The strain doesn't announce itself. It shows up as a stack of microweights. The bottom joins the weather. After heavy rains, siltation speeds up. Phantom islands grow faster on flood pulses, then migrate when wind flips. Dredgers can't chase during a blow. Draft advisories tighten for a fortnight. Deep draft transits slide to spring tides. Pilots juggle a deeper tide plan with a shorter day plan. One slip and a ship that would have cleared by a meter clears by a rumor. Masters choose conservatism. Schedules pay. Every environmental tripwire pulls a legal lever. Haze triggers voluntary speed reductions that behave like rules. Spills pull mandatory slow zones. Surges prompt mooring restrictions. Monsoon rain shoves AIS anomalies into the VTS mix. None of these need a conspiracy. Weather is enough. The spreadsheet notices, long before headlines do, that Malacca's throughput falls not only to steel and sand, but to sky. Ask May in the control tower at PSA. She watches a squall cut a key in half and reprioritizes 3 strings while a spill advisory blinks. Her screen looks like a puzzle, her voice stays calm. She shaves 20 seconds from moves that took 60 yesterday and still loses an hour to visibility. Ask Rizzle on a tanker bridge near Tanjung Piai. He hears haze in the horn and feels set in his palm. He adds a half knot and calls the tug early. He knows the price. 5 minutes now, 50 ships later. The weather pivot isn't the apocalypse. It's friction multiplied. Haze turns minutes brittle. Spills draw circles you can't see but must obey. Surges teach keys new angles. Monsoon drift trains sand to move faster than budgets. The corridor keeps working because people bend, but the bend gets tighter every season that rare becomes normal. The 72-hour cascade, a closure walkthrough. Our agrounded tanker kisses a sand hump in haze near Phillips Channel. No sirens, just a slow radio exchange that tightens everyone's voice. VTS freezes southbound deep draft traffic, pending verification. A Maritime NOTAM draws a red box around the scene. It looks small on a screen. It's not. Anchors splash in sequence. Tug allocations flip to salvage. The queue begins. Hour 6. Advisories ping across the Indian Ocean. Delay Malacca-Singapore transits. Consider Lombok, Makassar. Owners request waivers. Terminals answer with silence. Bunkering boards in Singapore tighten ration plans. Yard planners pre-pick hot transshipment. A refinery supervisor on Jurong trims crude runs for safety, a phrase that means protect the slate. Hour 12. Anchorage fills. Tug masters rotate to heavy jobs. Routine moves wait. Port State Control issues temporary routing guidance. One way at a pinch, speed caps in haze. Insurance brokers forward elevated caution notes. Cyber and war risk riders adjust mid-voyage. LNG schedulers in Tokyo and Incheon start swapping slots on encrypted calls, trading minutes like currency. A grid planner opens the demand response template and doesn't send it yet. Hour 18. Factory phones ring. A Penang test house asks where the chiplets are. The freighter missed its feeder because bunkers slipped. An Incheon battery line spot buys air for sealant cartridges. The logistics manager knows she'll be called a hero for spending too much. She says yes anyway. The invoice will land elsewhere. Hour 24. Refinery cadence falters across the ring. Singapore's blend list shortens. Tanker ETAs stretch. Aviation teams receive the polite script. Consider tankering. Product traders bid for prompt cargoes. The curve twitches. LNG carriers outside Tokyo Bay hold longer than terminals like. Boil-off eats confidence. A dispatch screen shows fewer green bars for the evening peak. The planner clicks, monitor, then builds the first contingency. Hour 30. Salvage crews report partial success, which means nothing moves for another tide. Two VLCCs choose Lombok. A container alliance follows to keep its loop coherent. That choice extracts a dose of time from Colombo, Jeddah, Piraeus. A Chennai yard pulls overtime. A port clang gate queues down the road. Pressure migrates with steel. Hour 36. The anchorage looks like a holiday light show. On one box ship, a chief mate restows 6 bays to make a butterfly that might still catch a barge if the berth opens at dawn. He knows he's buying 10 minutes with 10 hours. He does it anyway. Careers are made on weeks like this, so are mistakes. Hour 42. Insurers publish an interim bulletin. Elevated administrative delays, heightened cyber vigilance. That sentence adds dollars to every minute at anchor. AIS anomalies appear in rain. Captains widen CPAs. VTS suggests, pilots advise, masters comply. Conservatism breeds more delay. It's rational, it's costly. Hour 48. Factory Asia exhales and tightens. A fab in H. Sinchu idles a bay rather than risk a recipe drift. The manager calls it yield protection. The CFO will call it softness. A Yokohama row/row shifts Monday's berth to Tuesday night. Dealers reschedule handovers. A Korean plant warms a gas peaker for the evening, buying megawatts with emissions and regret. Hour 54. Political phones heat. Transport ministers ask for clarity. Agencies promise progress by next tide. A literal state proposes a joint safety review that sounds cooperative and reads like leverage. A second state issues an environmental hold in a neighboring reach. Sovereignty games fit inside safety words. Ships wait either way. Hour 60. A salvage team frees the tanker at high water. Tugs nudge, props churn, the scar is visible but shallow. Surveyors line up behind booms, hydrographic launches sprint to resound. The corridor remains, restricted pending verification. That pending is a steel word. Pilots line up tide plans like chess. Hour 66. Releases start. Deep draft 1 by 1, then pairs with tug cover. Speed caps hold. The queue thins in a line that doesn't look like relief on deck. Inside control towers, whiteboards turn back to digital. Yard cranes chase the new rhythm. Someone finally sleeps. Hour 72. Open isn't recover. The wave that paused returns distorted. Lombok detours arrive off schedule into ports that weren't staffed for Wednesday. Singapore runs storm mode on a clear day. Refineries unwind trims carefully to avoid thermal shock. LNG slot swaps remain in place for a week. Insurance keeps the premium bump until conditions normalize, a phrase that lingers. A captain logs departure in neat print. A planner deletes 3 red cells and leaves 2. The world moves, the echo stays. The money that moves the water, finance as lifeline. By the time the lane unclenches, the next battle is already moving money. The strait runs on hydrology, but it's steered by credit. Indexes flicker before pilots see a tide. A refinery trims runs and a trader's screen lights up. A tug pool tightens and an insurer sketches a new surcharge. Water feels physical until you watch it priced. Start with tolls that stop acting like stickers and start breathing like barometers. Index-linked charges used to be a think tank slide. Now they're a spreadsheet at the canal desk and 2 terminals away. When visibility drops below a threshold or draft advisories tighten, a drought premium quietly kicks in. It's not punishment, it's triage. The extra dollars funnel into a pot earmarked for dredge cycles, silt traps at river mouths, and night sight gear that cuts haze holds. Operators accept it the way airlines accept de-icing fees. Annoyed, then grateful the wheels still turn. Resilience finance becomes the scaffolding under every decision. A port authority that once sold bonds for cranes now sells paper for silt. Green tranches with covenants tied to actual water, kilometers of channel resounded per quarter, lead times on dredges, response drills held in squall seasons, cyber hardening for VTS and harbor tugs. Miss the metrics, pay a coupon step-up. Hit them, shave basis points. Banks don't want speeches. They want valves installed and dashboards that work. The money that lands in dredge accounts arrives because monthly photos show sand moved where it was supposed to. Insurance learns the same language. Parametric covers used to be exotic. In Malacca, they're becoming normal. A ring of buoys and tide gauges feed a live index. Visibility hours under 1,000 meters, draft bands below 22 meters on defined reaches, currents above set limits, slip past a trigger, and a payout hits a port's account inside days, not a legal war, a wire. Ports use it to hire an extra dredge crew, bring in salvage tugs on standby, and keep pilot launches fueled during weeks that used to starve. Underwriters price it cleanly, operators plan around it. It's not romance, it's rainfall quantified. Data is the new fuel, and sovereignty follows it. AIS feeds, ETA predictions, dredge soundings, wake maps, everyone wants them, and no one wants to be trapped by someone else's platform. A consortium offers a single pane of glass for the strait, sharing risk scores across owners, pilots, and ports. The catch: who owns the pipe? Littoral states push for custody, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia each arguing for nodes on their terms. A data trust forms with rules about access, audit, and deletion. Crews grumble at another login. Owners grumble at fees. Regulators insist that trust buys speed when a hump moves or a spoof hits. Later, when a parametric policy pays because a gauge nobody argued over reported a dip, the grumbling softens. Capital votes with its feet when uncertainty lingers. Funds that once loved port equity ask harder questions. What's your Haze playbook? How fast can you pivot pilotage under cyber advisory? Show me your Silt curve and your dredge pipeline. Projects with answers, tiered berth access in fog, integrated yard analytics that flex dockings, bunkering corridors pre-approved for methanol with safety nets, clear committees. Those without get deferred. You can feel it in yards downstream. A terminal with live current modeling gets the crane. One with promises gets a visit and nothing else. Meanwhile, the quiet currents flow through trade finance. Letters of credit acquire climate clauses. If a shipment misses a delivery window because the strait triggers a defined hydrologic index, penalties ease, cash doesn't lock, working capital doesn't die. Banks discover this costs less than litigating, act of God, in 10 jurisdictions. Suppliers discover a delay doesn't turn into a solvency scare. The clause that sounded academic in a lawyer's lunch keeps a factory from freezing payroll after a week of fog. Inventory stops being a sin when it's smart. Shippers stop pretending they can carry zero and live on ETAs. They pay for strategic slack in forward hubs, Singapore, Port Klang, Tanjung Pelepers, stocking days of high-velocity parts in temperature-controlled racks whose financing depends on hydrology. Warehouses sell time slices. Release fees fall when the strait is green, rise when it's blinking orange. Whoever wrote that contract built a resilience business without saying the word. Sovereign money moves too. ASEAN infrastructure funds carve a Malacca envelope to co-finance dredge fleets, salvage capability, and joint hydrographic missions. It looks like cooperation because it is, and leverage. Signatories who pay expect a say when maritime NOTAMs creep and environmental holds last longer than weather. Side deals hitch along. A shared Silt lab in Penang, a joint cyber unit in Batam hardening VTS code, a Haze research grant tied to peatland restoration upriver. Someone will call it geopolitics. The crew that gets a quicker green light in rain calls it useful. Then there are the instruments that punish drift. A shipping line that ignores cyber hygiene gets priced out. A port that publishes gauges late loses premium discounts. A hub that can prove anchorless arrival reliability gets loyalty rebates from carriers who think time is oxygen. Incentives stack until they look like habits. After 2 fog seasons, that's culture. Of course, not all money is patient. Funds test, Malacca trades. Freight futures widen when the first advisory hits. Bunker spreads pop on rumor. A listed terminal stock dips the morning a spill trends. Some of it is noise. Some of it is an early warning for planners who treat prices as forecasts. A CFO in Busan watches a bunker screen and calls a captain to slow steam by half a knot to protect a window that moved and a budget that didn't. Finance reaches the wheelhouse in a sentence: "We are paying for certainty, go buy it." Not everyone adjusts at the same speed. A mid-tier port declines parametric cover, then sells a crane to fund a dredge after the second sand wave eats draft. A carrier refuses index-linked tolls and pays more in overtime after a week of holds. A refinery bets on usual and cuts twice in a month. They learn. The strait charges tuition. Here's the shift under the noise. For a century, Malacca ran on engineering and seamanship. Now it runs on covenants and triggers. Live gauges become collateral, checklists buy credit. A dredge tender reads like a bond prospectus. Water becomes a balance sheet line with teeth. If the strait is a throttle, finance is the hand that stops gripping and starts metering. Not to make it pretty, to keep how to survive the Malacca trap. There isn't an escape route. There's a way to last longer than the next surprise. The playbook starts with how you build the chain, not how you fix it when it snaps. Supply chains first. Dual sourcing isn't a slogan. It's a map with two real names, not one name and a hope. If your Tier 1 is in Suzhou, your shadow Tier 1 lives in Johor or Kaohsiung with tooling warmed, specs qualified, and MOQ clauses that don't collapse when you call in a dry week. Staging shifts from just-in-time to strategic slack. Days of cover held inside forward hubs you already use. Singapore, Port Klang, Tanjung Pelepers. The trick is precision. High-velocity SKUs in racked zones with FIFO scan to the hour. Slow movers still ride the main string. You publish pull rules tied to hydrology triggers. When draft dips below a set band or haze hours spike, the buffer breathes by a defined percentage. Finance calls it carrying cost. Operations calls it Tuesday saved. Energy buffers run the same logic. Floating storage for crude and products becomes a mobile reservoir. VLCCs staged just outside the choke. Time to hopscotch windows. LNG portfolios bake in flex. Optional swaps across terminals. Spare regas capacity contracted in a different bay. And 2 swing cargoes per month pre-negotiated at a known premium. Utilities rehearse peaks without panic. Peaker drills on cool days. Demand response contracts that send texts before the grid wheezes. And fuel stock rules that stop being suggestions. A refinery learns to cut clean. Trim rates by units that protect hardware and slates, not the nervous tick that wrecks a week. The baseline is simple. Molecules that don't depend on one lane, and megawatts that don't assume all ships are on time. Ports make alliances that behave like bridges. Slot sharing agreements graduate from ad hoc favors to signed choreography, paired windows between Singapore and Klang, harmonized yard codes, and cross-hub butterfly corridors that treat 2 terminals like 1 yard for 20 hours. Crisis MOUs pre-assign salvage tugs, dredge teams, and hydrographic launches across borders. When a hump moves, the response is a phone tree with names, not press releases with adjectives. Anchorless arrival goes from pilot project to habit. Lines commit to tight ETAs. Ports reward with priority pilotage and bundled bunkers. The queue shrinks because discipline feels less painful than idling in smoke. Tech guardrails keep cyber from becoming current. ECDIS hygiene is a checklist with teeth, patch windows scheduled, hash checks logged, and a red team bridge drill that spoofs a pilot call once a quarter so the muscle memory is real. AIS trust is earned, not assumed. Triangulate with radar, visual, and wake maps. Treat single source serenity as a red flag. Pilots carry verification codes the way banks do. Challenge response phrases rotated weekly between VTS and bridges. Shoreside route optimizers run in fallback. If the planner's office goes dark, masters have a printed plan with fuel margins and alternate routings that don't require an app to unlock. The test is whether the server sings on a sunny day. It's whether the watch can tell a lie from a glitch at 03:17. Policy ties the literal into one lane instead of 3 neighboring streams. Fast dredge triggers get written, not wished. If draft readings fall below X for Y hours on reach Z, a joint tender opens within 48. Funding draws from a pre-capitalized pot every signatory paid into when times were calm. Haze alerts jump from tweets to thresholds. Speed advisories kick in off an index, not a tone of voice, and pilots, VTS, and owners read the same number from the same sensor. Cyber advisories coordinate, one region, one message cadence, so masters aren't reconciling 3 memos at a pinch point. Gray zone levers get sunshine. Environmental holds and safety slow walks sit under dashboards with timestamps. Friction can't hide in paperwork if paperwork is public. Factories relearn Slack without sinking in it. Buffer isn't a warehouse stuffed with guilt. It's a surgical layer, 2 days of critical gases at fab-adjacent depots with redundant chillers and audited turnover. A week of O rings 7 kilometers from the line, not 7,000. Golden pallets that ride air by default when the strait blinks yellow. Procurement changes the metric. Award business on delivery certainty under disruption. not pennies saved on a quiet quarter. Supplier drills move from slides to sirens. Once a year, a Tier 3 shuts its gate in rehearsal. Upstream tiers must keep a line alive for 72 hours without a truck from across the water. The report that follows decides more than a town hall does. Shipping lines tune networks to flex without fraying. Strings get one designated Lombok leg per quarter, flown not as panic but as practice. Crews learn the passes, ports learn the berth swap, terminals learn the yard stretch. Alliances deepen into trust but verify, data sharing on real ETAs and dwell times in a neutral exchange audited by third parties. The carrot is real. Carriers that hit anchorless windows get fuel certainty and tug priority. Those that drift eat a surcharge index to minutes, not moods. The penalty isn't a scold, it's arithmetic. Money underwrites the habit. Parametric insurance sits behind the captain's calm. Visibility under a threshold or draft advisories above a limit triggers a payout that funds extra tugs and dredges before the spreadsheet screams. Index-linked tolls breathe a drought premium into dredge accounts without a budget fight. Trade finance adds hydrology clauses, letters of credit that don't lock when an index says the strait paused. Suppliers survive a fog week without a solvency scare. Inventory financing in forward hubs ties rates to the same gauges. Green water, cheaper carry, orange, dearer, time priced the way distance is. None of this is free, it's cheaper than helplessness. The strait doesn't care about speeches. It rewards crews who practice verification, planners who stage days where they count, ports that share tug rosters, utilities that drill peakers, ministries that sign triggers, and CFOs who fund slack like it's a core asset. Survival in Malacca isn't an act of will. It's a stack of small, boring decisions made before the haze rolls in and the radio says softly, proceed with caution. Lives on the line, micro stories that anchor the stakes. At 04:10, Gia's phone lit up under the fluorescent hum of a Singapore yard office. 300 boxes stared back at her from the screen, colors, codes, temperatures, waiting to be bent into a plan that didn't exist 10 minutes ago. One container blinked in red, a heart transplant kit, ice and instruments, and a clock that tolerated no poetry. The mother ship had missed its window, the feeder wasn't here yet. Gia dragged boxes like chests, split gangs, stole a crane from a lower value string, and cleared a corridor through stacks built for a different day. She called a pilot she trusted, traded a favor she didn't have, and cut 60 minutes into 30. When the reefer finally rolled down the pier, the driver never saw the yard map rewritten for one box. He only heard a voice on the radio say, "Go, don't stop." Across the strait, rain chased a squall into the Singapore approaches as Captain Arif eased a battered launch through chop. The call came in the grey. An Indonesian pilot needed to board a bulk carrier drifting toward a shoal during a wind shift. The ship's freeboard towered over the launch like a wall. On a clear day, they danced. In haze, they guessed. Arif watched for the rope ladder, silhouetted against rain, and timed his approach between surges. The pilot, Hendra, 30 years on this water, hit the ladder on the third rise, boots, hands, breath, and vanished upward into steel and wind. He slid into a bridge dripping on the chart table, looked at instruments that lied politely, and listened to the water. One course change, 2 RPMs up, a half knot that saved a morning. On the way down hours later, he texted his wife a photo of rain off the bow. "Still here," he wrote, and left the hard part unsaid. In Penang, under cold blue lights, Aisha stared at a line of burn-in ovens that should have been full. A pallet of specialty gases was anchored 5 nautical miles outside Malacca, a box on a ship she could see on an app and not in her dock. She had 18 hours before a lot turned from wafers into scrap. She called a supplier in Johor, swapped cylinders no one promised, and rerouted a van that got stuck behind a roadblock she couldn't control. At hour 16, 2 men in a borrowed truck backed against her door like they were moving furniture. She signed without looking at the price. Down the line, a barcode beeped alive, the ovens hummed, and a warranty curve avoided a kink. In the cafeteria, she sent her team home with donuts and a joke. In her notebook, she wrote, "Never again with one supplier," and circled it until the paper thinned. On the Singapore Strait, the Filipino chief mate everyone called crews watched his ECDIS flicker just once at 03:17. AIS showed a target off his port bow moving backward. The radar didn't agree. His eye didn't either. He slowed a half knot, widened a CPA, and hailed the ghost. No answer. The fake target drifted like a drunk. His young second guessed, "It's clear, sir." Cruz shook his head. "We trust the sea, not the screen." 2 minutes later, a fiberglass fishing boat emerged from the haze, crossing exactly where the ghost had promised nothing. He felt the set in his palm on the wheel and added 1 degree of rudder like a prayer. The fisherman raised a hand without looking and was gone into rain. Cruz logged the anomaly in neat block letters and drew a small star in the margin that no auditor would see. In southern Thailand, under a corrugated roof that rattled in afternoon wind, Priu's family watched a meeting on a borrowed TV about a land bridge they didn't fully understand. The line on the map ran near the rubber trees that paid for school uniforms and a new motorbike. Jobs, the men with microphones said. Ports, rails, a faster world. The village headman nodded on camera. When the truck from the city left in a fog of dust, they counted. 2 cousins who could work a crane, 1 uncle who could drive nights, a grandfather who remembered when the old road went quiet during monsoon. Later, a survey team in yellow vests stood in the field and talked about a fence. Priu measured the distance with her eyes and wondered if the bananas would taste like trains. On the bridge of a small car carrier off Yokohama, Yamamoto checked his watch and his tide book and calculated the price of a whisper. The Sunday tide had slipped into Monday morning. His berth now sat behind a string that hadn't been supposed to be there. The cars below deck slept under salt and time. He called the terminal and heard the sentence he hated most. "Please stand by." He walked down to deck 3 and ran a hand over a hood that would be late to a showroom. He told a junior officer about the time the schedule sang. The officer looked at him like a museum piece and smiled kindly. Back on the bridge, the radio put 2 boats into a tango, and he forgot his story and added a half knot to catch a window that might not exist. In a glass cubicle in Incheon, Myra signed the demand response notice she had hoped to retire with. The peakers had warmed twice this week on forecasts that teased heat and delivered murk. She thought about the dye house in Daegu that had called last time, pleading for another hour. She approved the list of factories to call, alphabetically, and circled 2 with a pen. She took an extra minute to phone them herself. "We'll owe you," she said, and meant it. She remembered 2013 and 2018, and a winter night her father told her about candles in stairwells. The grid purred like a cat behind glass. She wished it would hiss sometimes so people would hear it. At a harbor office in Port Klang, a young dispatcher named Farid watched a tug list and wrote 3 names on a sticky note. The captains who never bark, even when you ask for 2 jobs in one tide. His supervisor taught him to memorize their birthdays. He learned their voices instead. "Brother, please," he'd say over the radio, and the answer would come back in time saved. He kept a little box of sweets in his drawer for days when someone missed a child's school play because a ship chose Lombok and landed on Wednesday. On his way home, he waved at cranes like they were trees he grew himself. In a shop half a world away, Rajesh slid the last of his gaskets into a cardboard box and taped it like treasure. The courier had promised a miracle. He'd heard about a strait in a place he'd never see, and a call from a woman he'd never meet had made his week more important than the last 10 combined. He paid extra for a label that looked official, filled out a form he didn't quite understand, and whispered a blessing in a language older than the ship's. Months later, a notebook in Penang would have his name written small next to a donut. These aren't the headlines. They're the gears that keep the lights on, surgeries on time, and paycheck lines unbroken when Malacca breathes wrong. For every spreadsheet that counts minutes, there's a person who steals one back with a phone call, a shoulder check in rain, a promise they shouldn't make and do anyway. The strait is physics. The fix, most days, is people, tired and precise, borrowing against tomorrow to get another hour out of today. A $10 trillion economy is squeezed not by enemies, but by kilometers and minutes, by sand that moves, weather that lies, and clocks that won't wait. Here's where things get interesting. The strait doesn't need to close to break you. It just needs to slow by inches, by minutes, by math. If you want the next chapter, the lane that can turn off 20% of global oil in a day, watch what's next. Subscribe for more untold intersections of geography, money, and risk. And stay with the people who hold the world together when maps say they shouldn't.